This is the Sega GameGear that we fixed up a couple of weeks ago here on the channel. It needed a recap along with a couple of minor repairs, but it is fully working now. The thing is though, that screen, well, that definitely could be better. And so, as you may be seeing at the end of the last video, I do have a new screen here, all the way from Aliexpress, and we're going to try and fit that. But I sort of thought to myself, if we're going to the trouble of fitting a new screen, why don't we go all out and fully pimp our Sega GameGear? And so to do just that, I have some other goodies in this. All this came from Retrosix.co.uk. We have one new shell, and I decided to go for a red one. We have one new set of black buttons, but we won't be needing that D-pad because the other thing that they sell is a new analog style D-pad, specifically designed for the GameGear. Although I couldn't help but think, would this also work in other machines, you know, maybe even in other controllers. This thing replaces the D-pad, giving us a rather modern feeling analog controller. But that is getting slightly ahead of ourselves. The first thing I want to concentrate on is the screen. So within this polystyrene box, we have some parts, ribbon cable, that thing, GameGear LCD Mod Plus cable. Supposedly this thing means that we have fewer wires to run. Speaking of wires, we have one bit of wire, one controller, and the screen itself, complete with a new glass GameGear bezel. Now the first thing that jumps out to me is that this is flat, whereas the original bezel on the GameGear has a beveled edge. But that will be a fairly minor complaint, so long as this screen works. And I say that because, as you know, this came from Aliexpress, and I have heard very mixed reviews about these screens, with some of them arriving faulty, with partly dead screens, dead pixels, vertical lines in them, all sorts of problems. Let's just hope, fingers crossed, that this one is good. What's the one thing missing from this picture though? Instructions. Now, like any self-respecting man, I would usually ignore the instructions and just crack on. But given the complexity of this, I think it's only right that we try to find them and follow them to the letter. So going onto the computer and back to the Aliexpress listing for the screen I bought. Well, this is it here, but if we do scroll down, all the information is still here, including instructions. It seems as if we will need to modify the case slightly to accept the new screen. But that is maybe getting slightly ahead of ourselves because, well, we need to do all the soldering bits first. So scrolling on down, and here we have the instructions for the Sega GameGear LCD Replacement Mod Revision 3.1 for the GameGear revision with the one ASIC. That is our GameGear. First thing it wants us to do then is remove a lot of components. We need to remove more or less everything associated with the original screen. So step 1, remove resistors 33, 34, 32, 57, 56, 41, 38, 44 and 43. Up in this corner of the board, there's resistor R33, there is R34 and R32. Now the easiest way to get these off, to be honest, is just to flood them in new solder and then they'll just lift off. Being very careful, of course, because we are very close to this plastic wheel. That's the brightness wheel, I think. And that's those three done. I will go over it with a bit of IPA and probably even a bit of wick just to lift off any of the excess solder that's on those pods. But removing all the rest of this is just going to be very similar, to be honest. So I'll crack on with doing all of that, and then we'll come back when it's time to remove the old LCD. There will be no going back after this, because this is the first part of this modification that is destructive. As to take this LCD off the board, well, the only way to do it is to peel the ribbon cable off, and once that's off, there is no real way to reattach it. So we'll take this tape off the back of it first, and then to remove the LCD, carefully peel it off. And that's the end of that. That screen is now dead. I need to tidy this up a bit though, because there are still some remnants of it stuck on there. But I can do that in a minute, because we also need to remove the CFL lamp and those two fuses. So that is now everything removed from the PCB. You know, in hindsight, to get that LCD ribbon off easier, what it might be better doing is using hot air rather than just pulling it off and then trying to clean it up with braid. Although I suppose either way, you're never reattaching that LCD ribbon, so gotta come off one way or another, whether you use hot air to melt it off or you just pull it off and then tidy up later. But that's it all done, although it's not everything that we need to remove, because the next step wants us to modify the case. Now granted, we're not going to be using this original case, but this post, that needs to be removed. That's the post through which the security bit goes, so I can only assume once we're finished with this, that security bit doesn't get reinstalled. But we need to take that off. But on this section, this bit of shielding here, we'll need to remove this, as they want us to cut off all those tabs. See if these things will go through it. Yeah, they are not cutting that. I'm just making a mess here. So let's just leave this bit for now. I want to see if we could just leave this out. Step 2 is the VGA connector, but we're just ignoring that. So on to step 3, it wants us to slide the GameGear mod, this bit, onto the GameGear PCB and solder data lines. You know, I'm not 100% sure of the correct position for this. Obviously I can move about there quite a bit. I thought maybe those notches would line up with the screw holes, but they don't really. So what I'm going to do is just line it up with the edge of the original PCB. We'll line up the new board in line with the GameGear board. Right, I cannot get this to stick, so what I'm going to do is just use the leg of a resistor as a means of bridging between the mod PCB and the original. That is well secured now, not going anywhere. Next thing it wants us to do is run some wires. Solder one wire from position T10 to the lower point of R32 on the GameGear board. Now solder one wire from clock to position FB on the GameGear board. And then solder a wire from the GGSMS point on this to pin 42 of the cartridge connector. The difficult thing about this though is that pin 42 is on the inside row. There's 45, 44, 43 and 42 is in there. But there is just a little gap at the bottom of the board just before you get to the cartridge connector, so let me see if I can feed the wire down through there. Just like that. We'll make off the top side first, and then the bottom side, 45, 44, 43, 42. It then goes on to talk about the VGA again, but we're not using that. So we need to install 3 wires from button 1, 2 and 3 across to the GameGear board. Now, whereabouts on this do we pick up buttons 1, 2 and 3? So we get button 1 from that side of C37, button 2 from that side of C38, and button 3 from that side of C36. That's those wires on, and it's now time to try and fit this thing. Well, we have run into the first problem. I have this in the wrong position. If I line up those holes there with those, you can see that none of the rest of it fits. And I've also just noticed actually that that wire we ran down here to the GameGear SMS point, there's a point on this for that, so you don't even need to install that wire. There's GameGear SMS there. And yeah, that wire is redundant. So I'll need to remove that again. But if that is to go on there like that, well, you can see that those holes there don't line up with anything underneath them. I need to release this board again because it needs to move that way and that way. So let's put this on here first. Well, I can't get this to stick along here. So what I'm going to do before I wind up damaging the ribbon here is I'm just going to take a bit of wire and we'll just bridge it like that. And I can just cut that off with a knife. And that's one done. Okay, that's on there now. All the connections are good, and I've checked to make sure that's connected to the correct pins. It's all fine. So this bit, that needs to go on something like that. And I feel like I could use another pair of hands to try and do this, but let's just see how we get on. Okay, that's it all done, and I have resecured the LCD board to the GameGear. We just have two more wires to run from positions P1 and P2 here, across to pins 2 and 3 of the brightness wheel. Well, let's test it. Everything hopefully will work. Let's see if we get a picture. Hey, that looks really good. Now it has the protective film here over the screen. But even through that, that is fantastic. Does the brightness control work? Yeah, that works fine. I am blown away by that. That is amazing. And no dead pixels, no dead lines, no issues at all. The screen is fine. So from that point of view, yes, the Aliexpress screen was a bit of a hassle to install. And we're not finished yet, I have to get it all in the case. But initial impressions on the quality of this, that is fantastic. So the next thing to install then is this, the analog replacement for the D-pad. Now, as I say, I got this and the case from Retrosix. They have their own YouTube channel, which I will link in the video's description. And on there, they have a video going into this thing in quite a bit of detail for how to install it and set it up. It is designed to work with both the single ASIC and the twin ASIC version of the GameGear. But I'm just going to gloss over it here very quickly for our installation. If you want to see more detailed information about it, go check out their video. So this thing is designed to sit on the board, something like that. There's a notch in it there which lines up with that notch in the original PCB. That hole lines up there and that hole lines up as well. And essentially we just need to drop solder blobs onto each of these points where all the solder pads are to join it to the corresponding spot on the GameGear's board. Because this is the single ASIC, we do not use this point that's sticking out here. Rather, we make a connection here at this point. Now, just because there is a bit of distance between the solder point at the top here and the pin that we need to connect it to, I'm going to use a little bit of wire, or well, a bit of a lead of a resistor here. We'll bridge that across there, and then that will just anchor this thing, keep it in position so that I can do all the other points. Okay, that's a bit untidy, but it just has it anchored for me for now. I can tidy it up again in a minute. Well, that's it on. I was able to blow up the solder at most points, barring that one there, where I had to put a little wire in. But it is more than secure. I can't see it going anywhere. The other thing that you need to do as well is there's like a little jumper on it at that position. You need to just bridge that. Or, as Retrosix says in his video, you can put a resistor in, because bridging that enables the 4 LEDs here. As you can see, they are quite bright. Putting a resistor in there will dim them down a bit. But I don't mind the brightness. The reason for the LEDs, well, that's combined with these 4 potentiometers so that you can dial in the sensitivity of this analog stick. Now, yes, analog stick, non-analog GameGear. So what we are trying to dial in here is just how far you have to push this, the sensitivity of it, before it registers the input. You can see as we go left there, that last LED turns off. That's at the point where it will register the input. There's the right, up, and down. Those actually do seem quite sensitive as it is. I'm not sure we need to adjust them really. Maybe just the right hand one. So if you turn this clockwise, it increases the sensitivity. Yeah, I like that. It feels a bit better there. More similar to that side. Equally, up has to go quite a way. So let's see if we can increase the sensitivity on up. That feels better there. So I think that's pretty good. Next thing to do really is just try and get all of this into that new red case. And the first thing we need to do is modify this case to accept this screen. Now if you remember this post here, that needs to come out. Please don't shatter the plastic. Okay, that came off, causing no damage. But the difficult bit is going to be cutting out a new hole for this. In terms of the width, you can see like a beveled edge on that. I think if we just cut along there and there, that'll fit the width of this screen okay. But as for the top of it, we're going to have to go along just right at the edge of that. The ideal tool for this would be a Dremel, but you'll never guess what I don't have. So I'm just going to try and use a knife. And so we're just going to slowly work our way through this. This is going to take a while. Doing that top side took forever, but down this side we don't have to be just as neat. So I'm just using the snips instead. All that came off there fine. It's just a matter of working down it. Well, I had to make that hole quite a bit bigger than I initially thought, but I think it fits now. So let's just get it stuck down, shall we? This thing has 3M sticky tape on it. In fact, just before we do that, there's a couple of high spots just along here. Right, that feels better. So let's just get it stuck down. And that's it. You can just about see a small gap there, but I dare say once the whole thing's put together and there's no light inside there, yeah, that'll be okay. Not going to take that off yet. We'll leave the money shot till the end. So we'll put the speaker in there. And we have this new little clip to put on it. I wonder are there screws to go in those bits? Because there is a little bag of screws with it. There's very small ones there. They probably go into that. We don't need the D-pad, but we will take the new buttons. I need to transplant the power and audio boards into this bit. As I'm sure you can tell, the new bottom section of the case comes with a new little bit of shielding. There's the original one that we tried to modify earlier. This one is completely different, just cuts things off at that point. So I didn't have to try butchering this, but it is what it is. And we even get a matching black switch. That must go that way around. New bit of plastic to cover the battery compartment. And so it's just a matter of putting this in here. Now, this is going to be fiddly enough, I think. Because I need to make the connection to this, and then all of this, you know, this has to loop around like that. And be connected in there. So because of the modifications we had to do to the case, you know, cutting it out to fit the screen, we no longer have a screw at this side of the cartridge connector, and we no longer have a screw in this position. Now the smaller screws, they're just holding the PCB in. The two larger screws that are usually supporting the cartridge connector, well, we've only got one of them now. And you can see that it does move a bit. So with time, with cartridges coming in and out, you may experience some broken solder joints in here. Just something to bear in mind, although I don't really see any other solution. The other thing that's going to be a problem, is this going to foul the cartridge connector? That ribbon's just going to wind up getting squashed in there. But I suppose it should be okay. So let's just put it together and then we can give it another try. I was having serious trouble there getting this thing together just on this side. It's this. If you notice this thing here, which is over there covering those battery contacts, there's the original one. That is quite a bit thicker than that. Maybe twice the thickness. And that's just enough to stop this closing properly. I could have got it closed, but I had to force it. I think it was pressing against some of these capacitors. So we'll just put the original one on instead. It goes together a lot better now. And there's our Sega GameGear. Just look at how ridiculously good that screen is. I am shocked. That is fantastic. So that's just what it looks like out of the box. But if we hold down start and push 1 and 2, that should introduce scan lines. Yeah, there they are. And see, to be honest with you, I actually think I prefer it like that. The analog stick is nice and responsive. Can't tell any lag. Yeah, seems fine to me. What other screen options do we have? So hold on, start again. Let's change the aspect ratio of that slightly. Those circles, those rings look more circular now. Is that the correct 1:1 aspect ratio? Although if it is cutting off the edges of the screen ever so slightly. It's the same, but with scan lines. There's the screen further zoomed in. Zoomed in with scan lines. Not really sure of the purpose of that. It's zoomed the way out, although you can see the edges of the GameGear original screen, where the edge of the graphics are. And then we're just back to where we started. Although I do think I prefer it with those scan lines. Quite a bit of lag in this game. Whoops. Well, there it is. But the only thing I'm slightly disappointed in is the finish around this. It would be nice if it came with something just to close off that hole. Although I suppose we could try and 3D print something. Well, it turns out there's no point in even trying to 3D print something for that analog stick. And that's because Retrosix, they sell like a little washer that sits underneath the stick in that hole, just covering it up. It's a bit of a shame that they don't include it with the D-pad, even if this had to be another £1 or £2 dearer to include that. But I've got one on order. When it gets here, sure, I'll stick a photo of it on my community page. But just one thing I want to show you very quickly before we finish up. You'll notice that I now have a Sega Master System game in here. That's installed using my original Gear Master converter. I've had that from the early 90s, back when I had my Sega Master System 2 and my original GameGear. But one thing I didn't know until recently, in conversation with Dudley from the Yesterzine YouTube channel. Dudley is a bit of an expert on all things 8-bit Sega, but I always thought, playing Master System games on the GameGear, I always thought they looked a bit crap on the screen, and I always put that down to the GameGear itself. But no, the limiting factor was always the screen. The GameGear renders the Sega Master System game in its full resolution, and now that we have a higher resolution screen in here, well, will you see how good this looks. Now I know it is just a 3.5-inch screen, but I have never seen a Sega Master System game look so sharp. This looks amazing. So I can definitely see me playing my way through Sonic the Hedgehog on this. That was the first game I ever completed, actually. So I think I will have to play it through to completion again on this new modified Sega GameGear. I really can't get over just how good that screen looks. It is fantastic. So Sonic's sitting there tapping his foot at me, rather impatiently waiting. I'm going to go and have a game of this. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.